Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sew Spark Studio. I'm Paula. The holiday season is approaching, and so as I'm getting out my decorations and putting my house together, I rediscovered these little guys who actually are part of my decor every year. Now, they've been around for a long time. I actually made them for my children when they were young, and so they belong to my kids, but somehow when they left home, these stayed with me, at least for now. And so every year they usually sit by my fireplace and are part of my holiday decor. And not only are they cute, they're actually pretty easy to make. And so I thought I would share with you how to make these little reindeer. So you can access the pattern and instructions online at sewsparkstudio.com, and I'll put a link in the description of this video. But you can also follow along with my tutorial. They're a fairly easy project, something that often my fairly early beginners might do when I was teaching if they wanted to as the holidays approached. Students who were 13, 14, 15 years old who'd been sewing for 3 or 4 months could usually do this project. And the big challenge is some tricky curves and then trying to pull these right side out. Sometimes they'd turn the head and they'd be going, "Where's the ears?" And then I'd have to help them find the ears and get them pulled through as well. But as I said, relatively simple project and a lot of fun to make. So if this is something you'd like to add to your holiday decor, join me. Let's get started. So what I have here are 2 squares of felt. You really only need a scrap because the red's for the nose, or you can use pom-poms for the nose if you want to as well. And then 1 square of felt is enough for the antlers, or if you have a scrap, but you do need a rectangle, and the measurements are all on the instruction sheet as well. And then for the body, when I first started making these, I was using something called plush felt, which I really like for it. But they discontinued the 2 colors that I used most frequently. And when I went shopping for fabric this time, I couldn't even find any plush felt at all. I have seen it made in a fleece type of fabric, which works. But when you stuff it, the fleece stretches, and I didn't like the look as well. So this time when I went shopping, I ended up buying some terry towel. We'll see how this works. I'm hoping it's not too ravelly, but I think it's going to be okay. I'll let you know what I think when I'm done. And then I have been using beads for eyes, but I was thinking safety eyes, but I couldn't find anything small enough. So I found these tiny little buttons that I think will make great eyes. Of course, you need a little bit of thread and also some black embroidery thread for the features on the face. And I have that. I just didn't get it out yet. Oh, and a piece of flannel. And I'm not sure. I've got several flannels in my cupboard that are plaid. We'll see which one ends up being on this reindeer that I'm making today. So I printed the pattern, and I've only got it on the site in the standard letter size paper, 8.5 by 11 inches. It prints on 2 pages because the size of the body is a little bigger than that. So you just need to tape the legs on. And then cut out the pattern right on the outside line here. I have also done this where I've actually just rough cut the pieces and sewn right through the paper and the fabric and then ripped the paper off. But this time I'm going to trace around the edges rather than sewing through the paper. So I'm starting with the body, and there are actual dimensions of how big to cut a piece of fabric for this, but I'm just taking, I bought about 0.3 of a meter, and that would be about 1/3 of a yard. Looks like I have enough here actually to make 2 of them. So I just put my body on there. I'm just going to cut around him. And pin. And this is right sides together. So this side looks a little rougher, so I picked that side to be my right side. And then I'm going to trace around the outside of the pattern. So I'm using my friction pen to trace. This line's not going to show when I'm done. And again, you could just sew on the paper, and this is actually the first time I've done it with the tracing method. And the time it's taking, I'm sort of going, maybe I prefer sewing right on the paper. And then take the pattern off, and that's pretty clear. But I am going to pin it again. I don't want the two layers shifting while I'm sewing on this. And sewing machine time. I'm using a size 80-12 needle, standard machine foot here, and I have set my stitch length on 1.5, so a pretty short stitch length. Because of the curves and the trimming that I'm going to be doing on this, it will be more secure when it's stitched. And the neck edge here is left open, so I'm not going to be sewing on that line up at the top. So I have stitched on these lines and left it open along the neck edge up here. So now we're actually going to trim this. So I'm going to cut about 6 millimeters away from where I stitched it. We'll come back and do that after here. And at this neck edge, I'm actually going to cut right on the line there because that's going to be folded inside. So usually when I would sew something that had these kind of curves, I would notch on those curves, but for this particular project, I'm not doing that. Because I'm trimming a little closer to the edge than I normally would, we can get away without doing the notching there. But it does need some clipping, or you're going to have some bunching at these inner points. So you're going to just snip to your stitching. A little challenging because I can hardly see my stitching on this fabric. So you want to make sure that you don't do any holes. And with my students, I used to, some of my students would sometimes make these, and I would put my finger inside there and see, can I see my finger? And if I could see my finger, I knew there was a hole, but those are good. Now, anywhere that it goes in, I like to do a little clip. So right here where the leg meets the body, I'm going to do one at this neck edge right here on both sides. And where the foot meets the leg there, another one there. And we'll do one here. And I am going to do one at the bottom here. Some of these are not as important as others. So here, 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 here. This is the most important one there. And then I did 2 down here. So then you're going to turn this right side out through the neck edge. This one's easier than the head, but it'll take me a minute or 2 to get it through. So there's the body, and we're going to fill it now. This reindeer is kind of a beanbag type stuffy, if you want to call it that. And so it's filled with a combination of something that has some weight to it, as well as some fiber fill. And so you can use plastic pellets if you want. I find those to be quite expensive, and there are things in your kitchen that work just as well. So you could use white beans, or I've used split peas before. I use split peas mostly because the round dried peas roll away and make a mess more easily than split peas. But I've also used rice, and rice works really well. Any of those things, just don't get it wet. It's not washable once you do this. So I'm using rice today. And the instructions that I've written up say 15 to 30 mils in each leg. And I've actually never measured, I just put it in. But I thought today, if I'm going to put a measurement in the recipe, mix my cooking and my sewing here. If I'm going to put a measurement on the instructions, then I probably should, actually try to measure it. So I usually work with one side at a time. I find if I do both sides, you can end up breaking machine needles if you're not careful. So I do one side and stitch it in, and then the other. So there's 30 mils in that leg. Well, some of it went in that leg. Let's see how this works. Sometimes I just kind of put it in there and then shake it into the leg. So this will give me about 60 mils or a quarter cup there. I'm going to be stitching across here to close the rice in there. If there's too much rice and I sew on it, it'll break my needle. So I don't want too much rice in those legs, but I want enough to give them some body so that they're going to be floppy when he's sitting. And I'm making one that sits up, but you can actually, depending on how you put the head on, he can lay flat as well, or you can drape him over the back of a chair or something. Okay, just deciding if that's enough in there. All right, so I do the one side like I said, and then I'm going to go sew this so that that rice isn't flopping around while I'm working on the other side. So I've made sure that the rice is away from where I'm going to be stitching, and I just pinned it in place there. And then I'm just going to eyeball this line, but you could draw a line there if you wanted, if you felt like that was easier to work with. And I'm going to put my length on, I think 2.5 is fine for this. You don't need to do that extra short stitch. So there's my stitching. It's just a little bit of a curve. There's a dotted line on the pattern that shows where it goes. And there's my legs. So now I'm going to do the same for the legs on the other side. There's actually some rice already in the one. So 30 mils in each leg might be a little more than you need. Maybe more like, that's 2 tablespoons for those of you who prefer that. So I'm thinking maybe more like about 20 mils, 22 mils on each side, 25 mils. So about a tablespoon and a half, something like that. And I just go mostly by feel. I want the same amount of rice here as I've got on the other side. So I just feel what that feels like, and doesn't have to be totally precise. You could even do one leg at a time if you really wanted, and go stitch that leg and then come back and do more rice. And stitching time. So both sides are done, stitched along the edge of the leg there. So now I'm going to put about 30 mils or 2 tablespoons of rice in the bottom. And this is what helps him to balance if you're going to have him sitting up in particular. But I would do this even if I wanted him to be floppy. So there's 2, let's see. And I'm going to do a little more than that, actually. I might even do 60 mils or a 1/4 cup. Do 1 more tablespoon and see how that feels. And then, yep, let's do 60 mils. Quarter, whoops. This can get messy. 1/4 cup in there. Okay, that feels good. So yeah, about 60 mils or a 1/4 cup in the bottom. And then you can see he's already sitting upright. So I'm just gonna get my rice out of the way. I'm using polyester fiberfill stuffing. Whatever you've got, old pieces of fabric can go in here. And you're just going to do stuffing on top of the rice. So he doesn't need to be completely stuffed, as in I can't possibly push any more in there. There's still some softness in the body, so he's pretty spongy there, but it's going to help him position and sit up properly. And then you take these edges at the top and fold them inside. And I'm going to pin this. And you could stitch this by hand, but this is covered up. You're going to be gluing the head on here and then tying a scarf around the neck, so you're not going to see it. So I just top stitch it on the sewing machine. All right, back to the machine. So the stitching's just right across here and holds it shut and will be covered by the head. So that's it for the body for right now. So we're going to put that aside and start working on the antlers and the head. And so I have my felt that's for the antlers. So you need a piece that is 3 inches by 11 inches. So I'm just going to use my rotary blade here for this. And this I think is 12 inches. So we'll just cut a piece off the end. And then I need a piece of my fabric. Just going to put an X here so I know what I used for the wrong side. So I like to be consistent. So also this one's 4.5 inches by 11 inches. So I'm just going to straighten this edge out. And 4.5 inches. And you're going to take these right sides together, decide which is the right side on the felt. Doesn't really matter. Put them on top of each other with the long edges together. And I'm just going to pin this. And we're going to stitch these together. So we're stitching the antler fabric to the head fabric. The instructions are going to say to sew a 1/4 inch seam here and then trim it to 1/8 of an inch. So 6 millimeters and trim it to 3 millimeters. And I'm thinking, why bother with trimming? I'm just going to sew closer to a 3 millimeter seam. But if you're more comfortable doing the wider seam, go ahead with that. This is normal stitch length, 2.5. Backstitching actually doesn't really matter on this because we're not keeping this as a rectangular piece of fabric. So because I'm using the lighter thread, it's easy to see I've got my 3 millimeter seam here. So this is just pushed up. It says to finger press. This doesn't really press. I could use an iron on it, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to push it up. Then you're going to take this and fold it in half with the right side on the inside. And you want to keep this seam lined up when you do this. And I'm going to put a couple pins in just to hold that. And then you take your headpiece and you line this dotted line up with your actual seam or stitching there. Now, the instructions will say to trace this one as well, but I'm actually going to just leave this pattern on here and stitch close to the pattern edges rather than trying to trace it. So back to the sewing machine. So stitch length back to 1.5. And this time you're actually going to sew around the entire shape here. So I'm going to start at the bottom and back stitch. You just need to be careful if you're doing this method with taking the pins out, because pattern will come off if you take them all out, and then you still need that line to follow. So I left a couple in there to get me to the end of it. So now we're going to trim this the same as we did before. So about 6 millimeters, 1/4 inch away from the edge. All right, and then we're going to do some clips again. So I'm going to clip at the bottom of the ear. I'm actually going to do 2 clips there on each side. Again, being careful not to cut my stitches. And then at the top of the ear as well. Sometimes thread can match too well. I think 1 cut there will do. Just trim out a little more of the fabric here. And then each of these little points on the antlers need to be clipped. And then between the antlers, I would do at least 3, maybe 4 clips. And then you're going to make a cut on one side only across the bottom of the face here. And you can decide which side. It's kind of hard when it's inside out to decide which side you think looks best. The side you cut is going to be the back of the head. So it's supposed to be about 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch up from the bottom. If you want, you can draw a line. So I just pull the fabric apart and then do a snip. And then about 1 inch or 1.5 inches. Now this is where the felt is nice, because felt doesn't ravel out. I'm not sure how this terry is going to act in this place, but there's going to be some glue applied in this area when we attach the head to the body. So I think that's going to solve the problem for me. So now this is our opening. All of this needs to come through, and it's challenging because we've got little tiny ears and little antlers to pull out. So I'm going to grab a couple things to help me turn this. Don't forget to keep some of the scraps of your body fabric, because there's a little bit of fur we're going to glue between his ears at the end as well. So I've got my serger tweezers. I find those a little helpful here. And I use both ends, but you have to be careful with the points because you can make holes. And I'm using my friction pen because it's nice and smooth. And we'll see how this goes. So there is our head all turned out. I have to be careful with this terry cloth because you can pull it quite easily, but it is a little easier to turn than the plush felt was because it's not quite as bulky as that. So there's our head, ready for the next step. So now we're going to stuff this head firmly, again using the fiber fill, no more rice on this one. And I start with the antlers and the ears, and then I do the face, and I've got my pen here to help push it up in there. Once the head is stuffed, then we're just going to stitch this shut. And again, it doesn't have to look beautiful because it's going to get covered with glue and a scarf. So I've just got a double thread here knotted. And I'm going to come up on one side and basically just go kind of from the inside here. And there he is. That's done. Now I'm going to make the nose. Got a needle here and no knots in this one. Just going to do a row of basting or a running stitch around the edge here. Doesn't really matter what color this thread is because you're not going to see it. And then you pull on this thread, and I'm going to tie a knot with the ends. That's going to be glued on, so you're not going to see that backside. And that's his nose. So that just put aside for right now. So I'm going to sew on the eyes and do the eyebrows, and then there's a line down just in the nose area for kind of a mouth, I guess you could say. So I'm going to do those now. So again, you can mark these, but I just eyeball it. The eyes are in line with the bottom of the ears here. And so found out I don't hardly have any black embroidery thread left, but I do have dark brown, so that's going to work. So I'm going to go in from the back near this opening that was there. And so angle my needle up. And I happen to have buttons for eyes, but you can use beads. You could use googly eyes, you know, whatever you can find. If you wanted to use safety eyes, you need to put those in before you stuff it. So with the embroidery thread and the 6 strands, I'm only going to do one pass through the eye and angle back down to that same area. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a pull so it kind of indents into the face a little bit. And I'll take a stitch back here and go through the loop to knot that to hold it in place. And then I'm going to go up for the other eye and do the same thing. And these are pretty close together. And we'll do a knot there. And then come back up, same. And I'm going to come up on the outside of where I want the eyebrow to be. And you can kind of decide how you want to do the eyebrows. If you do them different ways, you can make them look mad or confused or surprised. Kind of gives them different expressions. So I don't know, it just kind of comes out however it comes out when I do them. But so then I'm going to go across and do the other eyebrow at the same time. So there's the one, and then the other one. And then I'm going to come up between the eyes, but underneath them here. I don't want to pull the eyebrows too tight there. And then I'm going to do just straight down. Now keep in mind, the nose is going to be here. So I want to be able to see that below the nose. And looks like I took way more thread than I needed. Not on the back. We're going to finish this up with a glue gun and a scarf. I'm going to cut about 3 little strips of the body fabric. My glue gun here. And I'm going to just stick these up here. If they seem like they're too long or something, you can do a little haircut. And I'm just gonna cut them in half. And then the nose. All right, so there's his face, all finished up. And we got the body. And so then just think, how do you want this? Like if you want him lying flat like this, you can put it on like this. If you were going to put him over the back of a chair or whatever. Looks like he's sleeping. But I usually like them sitting up. So I'm going to put it on about right here. So I'll put some glue on the back. You could sew this on too if you wanted. Glue works just as well. I don't use it as a toy for a child. Definitely with the buttons, it would have to be 3 or older. If you wanted it to be a toy, I would sew it on. Now, you see how it's falling back? A little more glue. And then I've got some flannel that I used. I live in Canada, and I made a Canada quilt at one point, and this was one of the fabrics. So that's going to go around his neck. I usually fold it in half for the back of the neck. And I usually just do one tie here. And then if you feel like it's too long, you can cut a little bit off. So I'm going to cut off about a couple centimeters, ½ an inch. And then just fringe it a bit. And he is all done. Here's our little red-nosed reindeer hanging out with his buds and just waiting for Christmas.